goodness, have we got an absolutely packed one for you this week. Lots of Starship action going on, as you can plainly see here in Texas, and loads of views around Florida to go with all that. We have surprising updates again from Blue Origin and the steps toward the next New Glenn flight, and more lunar missions are coming, with NASA having all but made a promise on this.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Hey, Marcus House with you here, and wow, has it been an action-packed week at Starbase. You may recall I left you last week just after Ship 40 returned to the build site early after completing a single engine static fire. We were hoping for a full 6 to fire after that, but it had instead been rolled home. The cause of the early return is still unknown, but it can't have been a huge issue because it was already preparing to roll back just a few days later. During the time it was being worked on in the bay though, SpaceX didn't waste any time. As soon as Ship 40 was moved out of that middle aisle and onto the front left workstation to get looked over, they quickly began to get the next ship, Ship 41, on the back stand here, ready for its cryogenic testing. Yes, we've got testing going on in a rotation here right now. The thrust simulator stand rolled into the bay early Sunday morning, where they were kind enough to leave the door open for us to watch them lifting Ship 41 off its work stand and down onto the test stand. In no time, there it was rolling down to masses where we had Shaun eagerly awaiting it to roll by in the daylight this time. This ship we are still expecting to launch with Flight 14, so this may be the first orbital Starship if everything goes to plan with the upcoming Flight 13. Once arriving at masses, it was rolled right into place over the trench, and the actuators for pulling on and testing both the forward and aft flaps were hooked on. Before long, there was Ship 41's first cryogenic proof test, and it didn't stop there. It was detanked just hours later and was filled again. Just as we saw them do with Ship 40, that was all SpaceX needed to do at this point. Yes, here it was on Tuesday, already heading back to the production site, keeping Shaun a busy man this week. So with that initial Ship 41 testing already out of the way, SpaceX could now get back to Ship 40's static fire campaign. It's pretty nuts to see all this in such a short period of time. Here is the static fire stand already rolling out, again picking up Ship 40 and rolling right on back down to masses for what we hoped would be a completely healthy looking 6-engine static fire test. Boy, did they deliver. They filled those tanks right up to the expected levels and jumped right into it. Here we had the second ever version 3 Starship being static fired, and look at all that fury. This was a full 60-second test it seemed, and SpaceX confirmed this in a post with some beautiful views under the ship during startup. What we have already noticed is that the Starship sequence has changed from the Flight 12 sequence, and that now seems to involve both leeward side vacuum Raptor engines starting first, alongside one of those sea-level engines. If you haven't watched our deep dive segment last weekend on why this is important, this will give some very useful context. These 3 engines firing up first will kick the booster upward towards space in that known optimal flip direction. Then the remaining vacuum and 2 sea-level engines will light to accelerate onward to orbit. We hope this static fire success transfers perfectly to the hot stage separation in flight, of course. That shouldn't be too far away now, given that Ship 40 has already rolled back to Mega Bay 2. This meant masses was clear for more testing with Ship 41. Well, SpaceX were not done for the week with Ship 41 after that initial cryo test. Yes, they haven't been playing musical chairs, but musical starships this week. Here it was rolling back out on the cryo stand, bound for masses again on Friday morning. We can only assume that some more alterations needed to be made and retested, because it is now there at the test site going through more cryo testing. Now, to tie up the upper stage Starship action, can you believe we've just yesterday also watched SpaceX getting a start on Ship 42's construction, with the nose cone, forward section and Pez dispenser passing by? It's pretty hard to keep up with everything right now, and the last step coming up for Flight 13, of course, is a static fire from Booster 20. This should be close to finishing up all the preparations needed at this point. With that, Ship 41's flight partner Booster 21 also finished stacking this week. Its forward dome rolled out here recently, followed by the remaining 2 methane tank sections. The biggest sign that they were almost done with welding those together was this. The stand typically used for installing the liquid oxygen side tank was sitting in the ring yard behind the Gigabay, as seen from the air thanks to RGV aerial photography. This is used to switch the methane section between the bridge cranes. It moved into the bay on Sunday morning and was back out the next morning not even 24 hours later. The end result is that Booster 21 now should be completely stacked. Trust SpaceX to not stop there though. Just an hour after the stand left the bay, here they were kicking off a ring parade. The common dome and the first two liquid oxygen tank sections for the next Super Heavy, Booster 22, began rolling in to start its own stacking process. It's absolutely crazy everything going on all at once. If all goes well for the next two Starship flights from Texas, this could be the very first Super Heavy to launch with Flight 15 from the Cape at Launch Complex 39A. If so, this could also make it the first booster that we ever see being laid down into a horizontal transport position and shipped off to the Cape here in the near future. Now, the hardware required to perform such horizontal super heavy action is currently being built over in the Sanchez area of this site right now and continues to evolve before our eyes. Most of it is already pretty much done actually, and it's all just needing to be assembled together. ChameleonCircuit has been working with us to put all this together in 3D for us, and hopefully this will give you a great sense of how it will all look in the end. The order of operations is still speculative, of course, until we see them do it for the first time, but the idea is that they will likely install two of these specially designed grid fin attachments into the mounts either side of the Super Heavy. These look to be equipped with levelling systems for 360 degrees of movement, which will allow the booster to be lifted off the stand, hooked up to the aft rig, and rotated 90 degrees into the horizontal position. This means it will rest on this cradle located near the forward or middle sections of the booster with the transporters. Now, with all that action out of the way, what about the launch pad that obviously needs to be ready for Starship Flight 13 coming up? If we take a look at Pad 2 this week, the obvious difference that will stand out is the lack of scaffolding in the centre of that launch mount. Thanks to this shot from above, you can clearly see that this was actively being removed during this flight. After it was gone, this gave way for some full-speed launch clamp and ship quick disconnect retraction tests, along with some new spectacular water deluge testing. Looking closer, these tests seemed a little different to any previous test. These seemed to come in pairs, one full pressure test and then another lower pressure test around 8 minutes later. Now that is a pretty good way to simulate the Super Heavy being caught by the tower. A little deluge there to protect the mount at the moment of a catch makes perfect sense to me. To add more support for this argument, this was even accompanied by the catch rails moving up and down a few times with both arms. Now, SpaceX hasn't mentioned any specific mission that will attempt the first ever catch of a version 3 vehicle, but we hope to see it as soon as Flight 14, assuming the next mission goes perfectly to plan for the Super Heavy. Now, the one other intriguing change to note here at Pad 2 would be the excavation of materials alongside the commodities lines that enter the back of the tower. It looks like SpaceX is adding an extra insulated cryogenic pipeline here. We aren't too sure what this is for just yet, but we're wondering if they will be going to try to reroute the liquid oxygen dump vent back down the tower. That's just pure speculation right now, but it would make sense given that this vent gave SpaceX problems before Flight 12. At the time, you may recall they had to install a brand new extension to stop the flow blowing back into the tower. Now, moving over to the old Pad 1 rapidly becoming new again, this has had a bunch of notable changes. If we start with the tower itself, they have removed the actuator from the back of the ship quick disconnect arm and have begun to sever the connections between each section. They've laid out the two sections of load spreaders beside the crane here, and we suspect the larger will be used for the elbow. The smaller is likely then for the extension that has the quick disconnect itself on the end. You may also notice that there is now scaffolding surrounding the base of the tower, which then continues all the way to the arm carriage, which is paving the way for a whole bunch of maintenance and upgrades. Along with that, seemingly popping up out of nowhere, you may have noticed this brand new roof behind the tower, which is only a few beams away from being completed. The new flame trench below is even beginning to reach the final depth, and this is revealing more of the hundreds of steel and concrete piles down here. Perhaps my favourite part is we can also see a few of the 6 massive pilots that supported the previous launch mount. You will recall the iconic 6-legged monster that stood here not so long ago, and the support for those legs will continue to live on and support the new design. Just to the side, we can see that they've started installing the large vacuum jacketed pipes used to fuel the super heavy booster, as well as some gas lines along those pipe racks. The concrete foundation here for the commodities bunker has now cured and should be ready to have the bunker framework itself lifted on top. This pre-assembly of the bunker has been a new process to Pad 1's order of operations, and they seem to be finding even more ways to work in parallel. You may see here that they've already begun to start welding sections of the steel waiting to be lifted in for the trench walls, which will now go in as long sections. Now with all this, a massive thank you to Greg Scott working along with us here, because we also have brilliant insights around the Florida sites. Before jumping into that, first a big thank you to Odoo for sponsoring today's video. One thing I've noticed over the years is that as projects grow, you end up collecting more and more software. One app for invoicing, another for customer management, something else for accounting and inventory, spreadsheets trying to glue it all together, and before long, keeping everything in sync becomes a job in itself. That's exactly what Odoo is designed to solve. It's an all-in-one business platform where all of those tools work together under the one single system. Whether you're managing sales, accounting, inventory, projects, customer relationships, marketing, HR, or just trying to keep track of what's going on across your business, the information flows seamlessly between all the apps instead of living in isolated silos. For example, a customer places an order from the website built with Odoo. It can then automatically update your inventory, generate the invoice, notify your accounting department, and keep your sales pipeline up to date, all without you needing to re-enter the same information multiple times. You can streamline all the communications with your team as well, so that everything is recorded and you have your projects well planned and executed. The interfaces are clean, intuitive, and modular, so you can start with the features just that you need today and then expand as your business grows. With over 70 integrated apps available under the one platform, it can save a huge amount of time and reduce the headaches that come from juggling multiple disconnected services. So if you'd like to see how Odoo could simplify your own workflow, check out the link there in the description. Thank you, Odoo. Okay, so diving into all this Florida action, if we begin with SpaceX's Roberts Road facilities, you can see the Gigabay here is much further ahead than the one in Texas. Cladding is quickly approaching the top, and the 4 tower cranes are gone, with the roof now almost completely covered over. In fact, the concrete floor of the penthouse underneath is already in. There are actually some white stands under construction nearby, which may be work stands for this bay. Now here we have some pieces for the 4th orbital launch mount, which will be for the 2nd tower at Launch Complex 37. You can see the pedestals are all in place for them to begin welding those together. Next door, you can see the pad, tower arms, and carriage, which have actually already rolled out. The arms rolled first, then the carriage just days later. They do still seem to be lacking some hardware, but nothing that can't be installed at the launch site. Speaking of, the stacking for the 1st tower at Launch Complex 37 is well underway. During this flight, we had the 2 modules already stacked, with the 3rd being prepared, and thanks to this shot from Julia with NSF later, indeed, the 3rd and 4th tower module has been stacked out of the 9, so it is already over half the height of the full tower. Thanks to Harry Stranger and Planet Labs, this satellite view from above just a few days ago on Thursday shows those arms and the carriage sitting right there. So cool. So what about Launch Complex 39A preparing to be the 1st tower here to launch a Starship from Florida? Those transport stands that they shipped here just a few weeks ago from Starbase in Texas are likely being used in the commissioning of the Starship pad. That ibuprofen test rig used to qualify the launch mount clamps has finished its job and has been removed from the mount, and there we have the cladding installation appearing finally on the tower. I just can't wait to see the Starship vehicles rolling into the Gigabay here to prepare for that 1st Florida flight. Thanks for all those great views there, Greg. If you love what he is doing there, do consider giving him a hand on Patreon. There is more and more going on all the time that we only get to see from above, so yeah, that would be super handy. With that, super grateful that you are subscribed right here too, because then we get to help make these events happen. Now we've got some interesting stuff with Falcon 9 flights this week too. On Sunday we started with a typical Starlink mission with Group 1740 from Vandenberg Space Force Base. Booster 1088 was landing on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You for its 17th recovery moments later, but that mission was rapidly followed the same day across the country from Florida at Space Launch Complex 40. This was the Sirius SXM-11 mission, and between the fairings was the 12th high-powered satellite for Sirius XM. Coincidentally, this was also Booster 1085's 17th mission, and after stage separation we had that view of the satellite up there continuing on its way to orbit. We've had a number of these missions before, of course, and you may recall seeing these satellites having this large mesh reflector that expands out almost 10 meters in diameter. There was the touchdown on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas there in the darkness, and nice and clean as always. Next up was Starlink Group 1746 back at Vandenberg on Wednesday evening. Booster 1100 was only on its 7th mission here, landing shortly after on Of Course I Still Love You, and wrapping up that week of Falcon 9 action, a sweet crystal clear view of the Starlink stack of 24 drifting away at deployment. Always nice when we see that shared. Now, another quick launch to mention was the next Amazon LEO mission here, launching on Atlas V on Thursday. Now, I believe this is still indeed the last ever LEO satellite stack launch for Atlas V. If you recall, the Atlas V is no longer being made, and with just the 4 Atlas Vs now in existence, they are all allocated to Starliner. Saying that, after you read through the June 30 Inspector General report released the other day, and given they talk about Starliner investigations going right through to the end of the year, I can't imagine there's going to be any Starliner action before mid-2027 at this point. Anyway, no problem with this mission, of course. United Launch Alliance deployed the LEO satellites there as planned, so we will need to wait for Vulcan before we will see ULA send any more to orbit at this point. Remember, we are still waiting for that to be given the thumbs up to fly again after the anomaly on its most recent flight with the USSF-87 mission almost 5 months ago. Now, it seems like we've got something new and interesting to talk about every week with Blue Origin. The reconstruction work at Launch Complex 36A after New Glenn exploded here back at the end of May keeps on providing us with new surprises. CEO Dave Limp shared with us that they are now moving ahead with an entirely new pad configuration, abandoning the original design. This change, they hope, is going to significantly speed up the rebuild. Instead of constructing a brand new transporter erector, Blue Origin is switching to a hybrid horizontal to vertical integration approach. The first and second stage will still be mated inside the horizontal integration facility as before, but the new transporter will then carry the fully assembled vehicle out to the pad, and a massive crane will pull New Glenn up into its vertical launch position. Once upright, the crane will then also be used to install the payload. This, I think, is a nice render of what the rebuilt pad is expected to look like, and that's worth comparing to how it originally looked before the accident. Another notable change is that the second Lightning Tower won't be returning at all. I mean, at this point, it almost seems like if there were to have been an accident, this may have been the best time for it, because Blue Origin had already been developing a very similar concept for the future 36B pad designed for the more powerful 9x4 New Glenn. As a neat added bonus, this new approach should allow them to support a faster launch turnaround in the future, and as you can probably already tell, the support tower has some pretty big modifications. If you compare this to how we've watched New Glenn fly in the previous missions, you can see that it will be launching rotated 90 degrees from before. I mean, there's a bunch of work just to support the new lines, umbilicals, and even a work platform as shown here. So where are we at right now? At this point, the team has already assembled an enormous 600-foot crane to begin working on the main tower here. You may recall Dave's post here soon after the accident saying that it can be repaired in place rather than being torn down. Well, it seems like what they're going to do now is carefully dismantle it section by section so that they can repair or modify the individual segments of the tower before it is reassembled. Just as a side note, I think what's interesting here is that this CC-8800-1 crane being used is the exact same one that was being used by SpaceX to build the currently active Tower 2 at Starbase in Texas and then the mobile launcher at KSC. It sure does get around. In this photo by Greg just yesterday, you can see they've already removed the top of the tower, so it is going to come down fast. So with all these huge changes, Blue Origin keeps on hinting that New Glenn should be back here to fly before the end of the year. I'm still pretty skeptical of that timeline, especially with how much they want to do here. I always think the problem with stating these self-imposed deadlines is that the more they keep saying it, the worse it appears when they just can't make it. Now, we have also just had another bunch of neat stuff announced by NASA during this week's moon base update. They are still betting on New Glenn flying soon in order to have them launch the Blue Moon Mark 1 endurance vehicle around the middle of next year, and they again have talked about Astrobotic's Griffin lander, which is still on track to launch by the end of this year, but we now know even more. It's great to see NASA giving us regular updates now on the progress of the moon base architecture, and Jared made it clear that we'll be getting awesome updates every month. In this update, we learnt that Astrobotic now has received 2 more commercial lunar payload service missions with their smaller Peregrine lander design. Intuitive Machines were awarded 1 using their Nova C, and Firefly's Blue Ghost lander was awarded another one. Together, these contracts are worth another $600 million, and if everything goes to plan, we should see all these 4 new missions head to the moon in late 2028. That is going to be a very fun year. Now, the most surprising announcement here was when Jared stated that NASA were considering potentially sending the Promise rover here, which is essentially the full-scale engineering model of the Perseverance rover, to land on the moon instead. Now, this has never been planned to use in a real mission, but it seems like they are looking really hard at implementing the needed radioisotope thermoelectric generator, or RTG, to power it and get it moving around the moon. Man, I love this idea because it can power itself through the long 14 Earth Day lunar nights and then explore around as much as they like at the South Pole region with almost no communication delay. All NASA's other rovers are just solar powered here because, it isn't easy for commercial partners to get hold of an RTG. Just surviving the lunar night is very difficult, even if you do end up with daylight coming back in after all that time. Promise with its RTG would not have to worry about that at all and should be able to drive around anywhere in the darkness for years, just like Perseverance and Curiosity on Mars. I think it'll be interesting to see what additions NASA will engineer into this to adapt it for the lunar South Pole. Of course, if they do go ahead with this, NASA won't have this as a test bed for the Mars rover, but at this point, Jared thinks that all the years of experience that NASA has with Perseverance on Mars, it is likely much more useful now up on the moon. Now, NASA has also had plenty of International Space Station action too. Astronauts Chris Williams and Jessica Meir have successfully carried out a rather unique repair job on the spacewalk this week. Back in late May, the Canadarm2 suffered an unexpected malfunction. One of the wrist joints on the robotic arm began pulling unusually high current with its motor and failed to move as commanded. After some investigation, NASA and the Canadian Space Agency jumped into action. Chris and Jessica removed the faulty wrist joint and installed a spare that had already been stored aboard the space station. The walk lasted 7 hours and 20 minutes, and once the repair was complete, Mission Control in Houston powered the arm back up and successfully verified the wrist powered back up correctly with all the data connections flowing. Through the week, they've been putting Canadarm2 through a series of motion tests. Assuming no further issue, it should be ready for full operation. This has been a great design. Canadarm2 was built with replaceable joints to keep it operating for decades. In this case, the faulty removed joint will be returned to Earth, presumably with SpaceX's Dragon, for inspection and perhaps even repair. Now, although there was no stream or coverage to speak of, the critical SWIFT mission designed to boost the orbit of NASA's SWIFT observatory that we talked about in depth last week had indeed launched on Friday morning. The Link spacecraft had reached orbit as intended, leaving the Catalyst team to acquire a signal and confirm the solar panels had deployed. All has gone well, which is great news. They've established communications with Link, and over several weeks, Catalyst will assess the propulsion, sensor and navigation systems, and then we hope have it approach the Swift observatory and complete a survey of it before going in for the capture. If they can, it is then going to take several months to push it into the higher orbit, so best of luck to all the teams involved in pulling this off. Now finally, it is worth a special mention that Rocket Lab this week announced that they are going to be acquiring Iridium. Peter Beck, the CEO, gave us a full rundown on all this, but essentially this is going to mean that Rocket Lab alone will not only be a launch provider and spacecraft creator, but also a vertically integrated powerhouse. It is essentially a terrific shortcut where Rocket Lab will have access to the extremely valuable spectrum used by Iridium for its communication networks, as well as obviously the constellation itself. More specifically, the L-band spectrum allocated to the Iridium constellation serves over 2.5 million customers right now worldwide. With this acquisition, Rocket Lab is going to build on the constellation to scale up into untapped markets and, as they say, pioneer new space-based services. I tell you what, if you go all the way back to that first launch of Electron in 2017, it is absolutely incredible how far they've come. So I hope you enjoyed this video, my friends. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. If you want to continue with more space goodness, check out this video here next. Thanks for watching all this way through as always. I'll catch you next weekend.